What if the justice system you trust turns against you? In the vast annals of modern justice, there exist harrowing tales that pose this very question. Stories of wrongful convictions that have not only shattered lives, but also left indelible marks on the fabric of justice. These are accounts of individuals who found themselves ensnared in a web of injustice, their innocence obscured by a system that should have protected them. We're about to journey through 10 such cases, from Daryl Hunt's wrongful conviction in North Carolina to the infamous Central Park 5 case, from the coerced confessions of the Norfolk Four to the tragic execution of Cameron Todd Willingham. These narratives are more than just stories. They're stark reminders of the fallibility of our legal systems, the devastating impact of wrongful convictions, and the urgent need for reform. So brace yourself as we delve into these heart-wrenching tales of justice gone awry. 1984, North Carolina, Daryl Hunt's life changes forever. As an innocent man, Hunt found himself ensnared in a tragic narrative of wrongful conviction. The crime was brutal, the rape and murder of Deborah Sykes, and the city was gripped by fear and outrage. Despite a glaring lack of physical evidence, Hunt was singled out, put on trial, and, in a move that underscored the racial tension of the time, an all-white jury sentenced him to life in prison. The case was a heartbreaking example of the justice system's flaws, underpinned by racial bias and a rush to find anyone guilty. But the truth has a way of surfacing. In 1994, a full 10 years after his conviction, DNA evidence finally cleared Hunt's name. The real perpetrator was identified, and the system that had failed Hunt so catastrophically was forced to confront its error. After nearly 2 decades, DNA set him free. From North Carolina, we move to New Zealand, where Arthur Allen Thomas faces a grim fate. In 1971, Thomas was thrust into the limelight, not for his accomplishments, but for a crime he didn't commit, a double murder. Despite the severity of the charges, what stands out in this case is not the crime itself, but the way it was handled. The police misconduct in this case was glaring. Evidence was not just mishandled, it was planted. This was not a case of an honest mistake, but a deliberate distortion of justice. Thomas was simply a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His life was upended, and he was thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. It took 9 long years before his conviction was overturned, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. His conviction was overturned, but the scars remained. 1996, Atlanta. Richard Jewell becomes the face of a crime he didn't commit. Imagine being hailed as a hero one moment, then publicly vilified the next. That's exactly what happened to Richard Jewell. After discovering a backpack filled with explosives during the Atlanta Olympics, he was initially praised for his quick thinking. However, the tide turned swiftly when the FBI considered him a suspect. The media had a field day. Headlines screamed of his alleged guilt, sensationalizing the case without waiting for concrete evidence or a trial verdict. This premature judgment, fueled by media sensationalism, painted Jewell as the villain in the public eye. It took 3 long months before the FBI officially cleared his name, yet the damage had been done. His reputation tarnished, his life thrust into unwanted chaos, all because of hasty judgments and a media frenzy that prioritized headlines over truth. He was exonerated, but his life was irreversibly damaged. Richard Jewell's case serves as a stark warning of the dangers of media sensationalism in the justice system. 1967, Rubin Carter, a renowned boxer, now fights for his freedom. Known as Hurricane, Carter was a force to be reckoned with in the ring. But one fateful night, he found himself in a fight of a different kind, the fight for his innocence. Accused of a triple murder he didn't commit, Carter was convicted based on flawed eyewitness testimony and suppressed evidence. The prosecution's case hinged on the testimony of 2 petty criminals who later recanted their statements, admitting they had lied to gain leniency in their own cases. Evidence that could have pointed to Carter's innocence was also held back, further tipping the scales of justice. The boxer, who had once been cheered on by crowds, now faced a lone battle against a flawed system. His conviction was eventually overturned in 1985, but not before he spent 19 years in prison. He was no longer a boxer in the ring, but a fighter against injustice. 1989 Central Park, 5 teenagers face a nightmarish ordeal. A chilling case that still echoes in the hallways of justice is that of the Central Park Five. 5 young boys of color were abruptly pulled into the vortex of the criminal justice system, accused of a heinous crime they didn't commit. The teenagers were coerced into confessing to the rape of a jogger in Central Park, their youth and vulnerability exploited by the system they were taught to trust. Their case was marred by racial bias, an ugly undercurrent that tainted the process of justice. The narrative constructed around them was not one of innocence until proven guilty, but of guilt assigned by the color of their skin. The quintet endured years of dehumanizing imprisonment before the truth emerged. DNA evidence and a confession from the actual perpetrator led to their exoneration. Years later, their innocence was finally recognized. Their story serves as a stark reminder of the perils of prejudice and the importance of procedural justice. 2005, Ryan Ferguson finds himself trapped in a web of lies. A normal young man, his life was upended when he was unjustly convicted for a murder he didn't commit. The evidence? A single testimony from a friend who claimed to have a sudden memory of the crime. This case serves as a chilling example of the dangers of relying solely on testimonies without corroborating evidence. The friend later recanted, admitting his testimony was a fabrication. But not before Ryan spent nearly a decade behind bars, his life irrevocably altered. Testimonies, while crucial to the judicial process, are not infallible. They can be influenced by factors such as coercion, manipulation, or simply faulty memory. It is therefore imperative that they are scrutinized, cross-verified, and supported by solid evidence to prevent innocent lives from being caught in the crossfire of justice. His story is a stark reminder of the perils of unchecked testimonies. Let it serve as a cautionary tale, urging us to demand thoroughness and accuracy in our pursuit of justice. 1997 Norfolk. 4 men are ensnared by flawed forensics. Derek Tice, Daniel Williams, Joseph Dick Jr., and Eric Wilson, collectively known as the Norfolk Four, found themselves at the mercy of a justice system gone awry. Their case was a chilling example of coerced confessions and flawed forensic evidence leading to wrongful convictions. With no physical evidence tying them to the crime and shaky alibis, the men were coerced into confessing to a rape and murder they did not commit. The confessions, disturbingly inconsistent, were accepted despite their glaring discrepancies. The forensic evidence, too, was problematic. Misinterpreted and misused, it painted a damning picture that ultimately led to their convictions. For years, they languished in prison, victims of a system that had failed them. But their fight for justice never wavered. Eventually, the truth emerged from beneath the rubble of injustice. DNA testing finally revealed their innocence. 1988, Marty Tankleff becomes a suspect in his parents' murder. A Long Island teenager, Marty was woken by police officers and thrust into a nightmare that would consume more than half his life. Under intense questioning, Marty succumbed to a psychological tactic known as the Reed technique, leading to a false confession that would seal his fate. This technique is designed to break down a suspect's resistance to confessing. In Marty's case, police lied about evidence, claiming his father had awakened from a coma and named him as the assailant. Shocked and confused, Marty began to question his own memory, wondering if he could have committed such a horrific act. Despite recanting his confession hours later, and the lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime, Marty was convicted and spent 17 years in prison before his conviction was overturned in 2007. His story exposes the dangers of rushed investigations. 1994 West Memphis, 3 teenagers face a grim fate. Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miss Kelly Jr., collectively known as the West Memphis Three, were ensnared in a whirlwind of a murder investigation. Accused of killing 3 8-year-old boys, their conviction was largely based on dubious evidence and their own coerced confessions. Despite discrepancies in the timeline and lack of physical evidence linking them to the crime, they were painted as the perpetrators. This was a classic case of tunnel vision, where investigators focused solely on the 3 teens, ignoring any alternative theories or leads. The teenagers were sentenced to prison, where they spent 18 years before new forensic evidence surfaced, leading to their release. The West Memphis Three's ordeal underscores the dangers of tunnel vision in criminal investigations. It's a chilling reminder that the pursuit of justice must be comprehensive and unbiased, always leaving room for the exploration of all possible scenarios. Their case sheds light on the dangers of tunnel vision in criminal investigations. Cameron Todd Willingham's case brings us face to face with the irreversible consequences of wrongful convictions. In 2004, Willingham was executed in Texas for allegedly setting a fire that claimed the lives of his 3 young daughters. The prosecution's case was built largely on what we now understand to be flawed forensic science. Doubts were raised about the arson evidence, yet these were overlooked, and Willingham was sentenced to death. Despite maintaining his innocence and impassioned pleas from experts who contested the scientific validity of the evidence, the justice system failed him. This case, more than any other, underscores the devastating, irreversible consequences of wrongful convictions. Not only was a potentially innocent man put to death, but the real perpetrator may have never been brought to justice. His life was taken for a crime he likely didn't commit. These 10 cases expose the harsh realities of wrongful convictions. From Daryl Hunt's 20-year struggle for vindication to the tragic fate of Cameron Todd Willingham, these stories reveal the devastating human cost of judicial errors. They shed light on the systemic flaws that can lead to such grave injustices: racial bias, coerced confessions, flawed forensic evidence, tunnel vision in investigations, and the dangers of media sensationalism. These narratives underscore the urgent need for reforms in our legal system. We must strive for a system that prioritizes exhaustive investigations, corroborates testimonies with tangible evidence, and guards against biases. We need to uphold the principle of innocent until proven guilty, and protect the rights of the innocent from the irreversible consequences of wrongful convictions. Let these stories serve as wake-up calls, urging us to ensure that justice is not just served, but served rightly and equitably. These stories serve as a stark reminder of the need for a more equitable and rigorous approach to justice.